Good morning, everybody. I have the honor this morning of introducing our keynote speaker, David Brazier. And as I mentioned, David and I first met in Germany a few years ago and just immediately kind of had this rapport in terms of our mutual interests and our backgrounds. And he came out to visit the following winter to the Toto Institute. And so I've really just had a great experience getting to know him and getting to know Caroline in the last few years, and have great admiration for what he's doing. He's the main teacher of this Amida Order, the Amida Trust based in England, but which also has an Amida USA kind of branch. He is a prolific writer, as is Caroline, but he's written, I think, 7 books. His original grounding in therapy was with Carl Rogers, who he worked with and knew. But I remember reading, before I ever knew him, I remember reading his book Zen Therapy, which was written many years ago, and I think it was really one of the kind of pioneering efforts to really integrate Buddhism and psychology at a time when people were just beginning to think about that. And he's been very instrumental in terms of basically making this conference happen, and the original planting of the seeds really 2 years ago with the idea of bringing people together on this theme of other-centered approaches. So without further ado, I introduce you to David Brazier.
Thank you very much. This conference came about because some of us had a concern. We had a sort of worry, and also an enthusiasm. So like with all things, there's a bright side and there's a shadow side. Like the enthusiasm was like the work that we were doing to do with psychotherapy, Buddhism, and particularly, I think, one says like integrating Buddhism and psychotherapy, but that's not really what we were doing. Primarily, I think what we were concerned with was, well, I started off with a question: if Buddhism were a therapy, if you consider it as a therapy, what sort of therapy is it? So my sense is more kind of, not that I'm doing psychotherapy and somehow integrating that with Buddhism, as that I'm doing Buddhism in the mode of psychotherapy. Because what was Buddha about? Buddha was about liberating people, releasing us from something, suffering perhaps, affliction, but certainly he had a mission, that was to do with the emancipation of human beings, both individually, like you and you and you and me, but also collectively. The Buddha established a movement, a sangha, something that has had momentum, that's carried on right down the centuries, right down to now. Otherwise, we wouldn't have buildings like this. There's a movement there. But is this movement just for Sunday afternoons? It's something about changing how we are, how the whole world is, something that nowadays we think addresses concerns that probably weren't even concerns then, like ecology. It has something for all of us. So the positive thing was we're doing Dharma as psychotherapy. The negative thing was that we were worried. We're worried that although there was a growing interest in psychotherapy in the West, it was being integrated in a way that perhaps was more about subverting Buddhism into a Western paradigm than changing the Western paradigm in some way through Buddhism. That you can integrate Buddhism and psychotherapy in different ways. You can integrate them at a level of technique. You can take techniques from one system and then you can use them in the service of another. I was trained as a psychotherapist at one stage. I was trained as a psychodramatist. Psychodrama provides a whole swatch of methods. Nowadays, a great many psychodramatists use those methods that were developed by Moreno in the service of completely different philosophies. Philosophies drawn from Freud, from Jung, from all over the place. Moreno had his own philosophy. A lot of people who do psychodrama today have very little idea what was the philosophy that gave birth to those methods. You see? Actually, Moreno's way of thinking was quite other power. It was quite spiritual. And that's very interesting, but that's another lecture. I haven't got... My problem this morning is I've got about 10 lectures, but only enough time for one. Anyway, what we hope is that this conference gets a ball rolling, that it gets a sufficient number of people sufficiently interested to keep some momentum with this going. Because the way that Buddhism and psychotherapy, what did Greg say? The way they conduct their romance, yes, their marriage. Yeah. This is really important. And I just want to get across this thing about like different levels of integration. So could I use you? Yeah? Just come here a minute. Let's, we could have a technique, we could have a technique and we could put up 2 chairs. This is a good psychotherapy technique, and we could say to the client, please sit here, you see, on one of these chairs. Now, this technique could be, we're not going to get you to do anything, but it might happen in your mind, you never know. This technique could be, please imagine that your mother is on this chair. Yeah? You can all do it. Yeah? You can all do it. Your mother's on this chair. Okay? This is a psychotherapy technique. Yeah? As soon as she starts to see her mother on that chair, something will start to happen for her. You see? She'll have feelings. She'll have thoughts. She'll remember scenes. She'll think of critical incidents, times when. Yeah? That sort of thing. Okay? So it's a technique. And the technique up to this point is kind of neutral. Yeah? What my philosophy is doesn't really matter very much. Yeah? Because she's up there with her mother and she can do what she likes. Yeah? Now, from our sort of object-related or other-centered point of view, this is it, really. Yeah? This person has an other, a significant other. Yeah? I might even say to her, is this chair in the right place? She might actually want the chair over here, That might feel better. I don't know. Or she might want, might want mother here, But if she did that, yeah, she'd be manipulating her own space. She'd be relating to her own other. Yeah? Like that. Yeah? And probably you even felt different things when I put the chair in different places. Yeah? But you see, I could also have a philosophy. As a therapist, I could have a philosophy. I could have, my philosophy might be, now look here, I want you to tell this woman all the things she got wrong. I want you to really, get that anger out of you. We want to see you express it. Yeah? I could have that sort of philosophy. Can you imagine Greg doing that? Not really. He'd have a different philosophy, right? Yeah? So you can see that the same technique could be used to the end of completely different philosophies, completely different ideas about what makes, thank you very much, you could go back. What makes a human being tick? What is a human being? What's the origin of their meaning? What's the meaning of their life? What's the meaning of their suffering? What's the meaning of their drama, their karma? Yeah? Karma really means drama, yeah? Like, we all make lots of drama, yeah? And it goes on and on and on and on and on. So what are you doing in psychotherapy? You're working with those karmas, those dramas, yeah? But how you work with them, a lot depends on your philosophy. Depends on where you're coming from. And the philosophy is sort of hidden, In England, I have a good friend. I'm going to commit the cardinal sin and sit on the protagonist's chair. But psychodramatist, you're not supposed to do that. In England, I have a good friend who's a philosopher, Mary Midgley. She's written about a dozen books, very good philosopher. And she says, like, the philosophy of any movement, any society, any group, it's like the plumbing in a building. Yeah? Most of the time you don't notice it. You don't know it's there. It's all just taken for granted. Most therapists are working, actually implementing some philosophy or other that they're largely taking for granted. And they're even taught that psychotherapy is a value-neutral thing in which they should be non-judgmental and so on and so on and so on. So that actually therapists are indoctrinated with a load of stuff that tells them that they don't really have a philosophy, even though they do. So that actually the whole philosophy becomes unconscious and subliminal, which actually means it gets imparted more effectively. When they did a survey, I mean, I was very struck, having been working with Carl Rogers, who developed, what was called a less directive approach. Yeah, his whole thing was like that initial scene, let the client do what she wants to do. Let her play the thing. Less directive approach. When they did a survey using various psychological methods, they discovered that Rogerian and client-centered and person-centered therapists were the most persuasive therapists. They were the ones who persuaded their clients to be like them more effectively than any of the others did, which of course is a paradox, you see. And that's because they weren't trying to. It's because they really believed that wasn't their job. Yeah? So there is a sort of paradoxical injunction involved in a great deal of therapy. What you think you're doing is often the opposite of what you're really doing. And it's because you really, really think it and you really believe in it that it works to achieve the opposite. This is just one of the great paradoxes of how human beings are. Everything you try and positively do throws a shadow. Yeah? Every time our will moves, the effect is to throw a shadow in the opposite direction. Very difficult thing for therapists to get used to. Okay, where should we go from here? When we look at this, person and other, the chair's gone, so now the other can be anywhere we like, yeah? Might be mother, might be father, might be whoever you want, yeah? Who's your significant other? What we're talking about is love, yeah? We're talking about love. We're talking about love flowing in both directions and the difficulty of it, yeah? The difficulty. I mean, when you get down to what is the psychopathology of clients generally, it comes in 1,000 forms. Like at the moment, they're trying to formulate the DSM, whatever it is, number 82 or something. 50 million varieties of psychopathology. Yeah, got absolutely nothing to do with psychology. Everything to do with social administration and payments of money and all that sort of thing. Nothing to do with psychology. But anyway, they're trying to classify all these different things that can go wrong with love in our lives. Yeah, basically. What's that sort of fundamental question, is kind of what went wrong with love in my life? Did my mother love me? Did my father love me? Did I love them? What about all the other people I ran into along the way? Yeah, like that. So what are we saying as Buddhists? You see, I think Buddhism has a lot to do with love. Love, compassion, joy, equanimity, and so on. But let's stick with love, yeah, because it's kind of central. And it's very interpersonal, right? Psychotherapy is very interpersonal. Love is very interpersonal. I think Pureland Buddhism, very interpersonal form of Buddhism. It's like relationship, me and the Buddha. Now, it's not about me becoming the Buddha particularly. It's about how I relate to the Buddha. So, what do we say as Buddhists? Yesterday, Judith asked, what heals? Yes, what heals? Well, I suppose as Buddhists we say the Dharma heals. Yeah, Dharma heals. And the Dharma is a lot to do with love. Yeah. And that's a very simple formula, and kind of everybody probably assent to it. But what then? Well then, you know, this person loves somebody or is loved by somebody, but we know it's not simple. It's not as simple as that. As soon as you try and love, you run into problems. Yeah. I have no doubt I was deeply loved by my mother. It's one of the sort of foundational things in my personal life. My mother loved me. She certainly did. And by the end of her life, we had a very close relationship. And when she died, it was very hard for me. And that's why I wrote the book, Who Loves Dies Well. It's all about the last week of my mother's life. That's what that book's about. But decades before, well, when I was a young man, my mother certainly still loved me. She loved me then too. But I was deeply embarrassed by the way she loved me. I found it excruciating. I couldn't stand it that my mother loved me. You know, I would cross the street and not be, I'm not with her, you know. It was awful. And not only did I find it excruciating that my mother loved me, but my father found it excruciating that my mother loved me. This was not good news. Well, you know, you start, as soon as love appears in the picture, Pandora's box opens. You know, a whole mass of demons get into the world. You know? I think when my parents got together, I've got some pictures from when they first got together, and they look like the most glamorous couple. I mean, he was a pilot in the Royal Air Force, and there he is in his uniform, you know. And he was one of the most decorated RAF war heroes, which was basically because during the war, he went, at the beginning of the war, everybody was asked to sign up. So he went down to sign up to join the Navy. And at the last minute, the two recruiting officers were next to each other. He decided to walk through the other door, and he joined the Air Force. He became a pilot. They trained him as a pilot. They sent him off to bomb Germany. Yeah. So here's an idealistic young man full of, you know, love for his country and so on. So what's he sent to do? To go out and kill civilians, drop explosive on them from a great height and kill thousands of them. Yeah? Love has its difficulties. You know, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? It's a sort of deep reflection for me, you know, that my father is one of the really best of the good guys and one of the worst of the bad guys simultaneously because of exactly the same acts. Do you see what I mean? Like, life's not simple. How do you love? You see? So if I'm on this chair, then my father is definitely one of those really significant others. Yeah. But if I'm trying to appreciate my father, I can't just, it isn't just, you see, when I worked with Carl felt that in the other person, there was a self-actualizing tendency. And the therapist's job was to create the conditions which allowed that tendency to bloom. Yeah, it's like a seed. You know, you put a seed in the ground, as long as you water it and give it some sunshine, it'll grow all of its own accord. This is a fairly individualistic notion of human growth and development. But the big factor in my father's life was, I go and be my father for a minute, I'm Ken Brazier, I become a bomber pilot. I have this crew of men. Yeah, there's a little group of us. We're going to fly these airplanes over Germany. Now, these airplanes are terribly vulnerable. You know, it's like a little kite. basically, canvas and timber struts. You're going to fly this thing over Germany, and these Germans, you can see them up ahead with all their lights, and they're scrambling their aircraft and sounding their sirens, and they're going to kill us. That's their love. Their love is to defend their country. Yeah? They're going to come out here and kill us. Yeah? That's their job. And we've got to do this repeatedly. Not only have we got to see all that, we've got to fly into the middle of it. Do our job, get out, get home. Yeah? Well, we get to know each other really well. Yeah? We've got to work. Yeah, we've really got to work together. That guy over there, he's manning the gun on the back of the airplane. That's where the enemy fighters are going to come. They're going to try and shoot us down. Yeah, my life sitting here in the pilot's seat, depends entirely on him. We get to know each other really well. Okay, we do our 20 raids over Germany, we survive. They reckoned 20 raids was as many as you could do. So as much as a human, it was such a stretch on your nerves, that was as much as you could honestly ask anybody to do. So at the end of 20, they redeploy me. So I'm Ken Brazier, and I get my papers. Oh, you're taken off bombing raids. You're now going to North Africa. North Africa, wonderful. Sunshine, off the front line, not really much fighting. I can fly my plane up and down the coast and clear mines. That's a fairly safe sort of thing to do, There's some photos of him from that time. Really relaxed, looks great. And then, a month later, oh, letter in the post. Oh, Jack bought it, yeah? He got shot down in over Belgium. Oh, that's really bad. Month later, Bill got killed in action. Yeah. By the time that a year had gone by, every single one was dead. Yeah. Now the thing is, if I'm going to understand my father, I'm not just understanding a being that's like a seed that will flourish if I've got to understand his world. Yeah? As a son, why? Why does my father, my father's dead now, but why would my father not drive at night? My father would not drive at night because all those lights reminded him. Yeah, they reminded him. He didn't want to be reminded. Yeah? Because the reality of this person's life is deeply embedded in the reality of these other lives. Yeah? If I'm going to understand from here, if I'm going to understand that man, I've got to understand something about his relationship with these people. Yeah? So, although, as a therapist, I can be like Rogers wanted me to be, and I can be client-centered. Yeah? Be client-centered. But really, to be client-centered, the client isn't client-centered. The client is centered on all these other people. Mother, father, comrades, people who died. The client's centered on all the other people because the client is the client's love. Yeah? And that love, not just, we talk about love and we think it's something sweet and flowing and wonderful and always good, but it brings all those problems. Yeah? Just like it's brought for me, just like it's brought for you. Yeah? How is my father going to love again when the people he loved have all died? Yeah? Have all been killed doing what he was doing. Yeah? What my father did, in fact, do was he then volunteered to go and fly again over Germany. I think he was trying to get himself killed. Yeah? He became a war hero because he wanted to be as dead as his friends. He wanted to be with them, and he wanted to go the way they'd gone. Yeah? In his mind, they'd all gone heroically, So he was going to go with them. Actually, he survived. So they gave him a whole box full of medals and told him he was a hero. Yeah? But it left a deep wound in one sense. But in another sense, that wound was the meaning of his life. Yeah? So I, his son, grow up a pacifist, Buddhist, and here's my father, this great sort of gung-ho, kill-em-all hero. Can I respect that man? You see? Well, yes, I can. I can. I can well imagine if I were in his shoes, in his life, in his time, yeah, I might be just the same. Yeah? This is like the spirit of a person. The spirit of a person is in their love, yeah? And their love is invested in other people, and other people, what did the Buddha say? They leave, they get sick, they die. Sometimes they betray you. Sometimes they walk out on you. They have other loves in their lives, which sometimes take them away. At a later date, we lived in Cyprus, which was then a British colony. And across the field, there was another family living. And my parents got to know those other people. And the other people, the man in that family, they were called the Litwins. And Hans Litwin only had one arm. Hans Litwin was a German. He'd lost his arm when British bombers had bombed his city. And one night, over a few bottles of alcohol, they worked out that my father had been one of the bombers who had dropped the bombs that had killed the rest of Hans's family and taken off his arm. Yeah? So, but this is life. This is real life. As a therapist, it's no good having a view. It seems to me it's a fundamental thing. As a therapist, it's really important not to have a view of life which is nicey-nicey. Yeah? Humans are rather savage animals. We do have a fundamental drive to try and love, I think. I think it's like the central fact of our life is that we're all trying to love, and we run into endless difficulty in doing so. Yeah? We run into real problems, like the ones I've just illustrated. I mean, you'd all each have your own story, I mean, there's any number of such stories. Nothing, What heals? Dharma heals. Dharma is about love. But love is not just simple. Love runs into problems, disappointments, frustration, horror, horrible things. And we are, in a sense, defeated by those things. But the whole point of Dharma is not just love in the simple sense. It's love beyond that defeat. Yeah? Dharma is love beyond defeat. Yeah? Beyond giving up. Beyond realizing what you're up against. Beyond realizing dukkha. Beyond realizing the reality of life. And the reality of life is the others. The significant others in your life and what happens to them and what they do to you. Yeah? And what you do to them. And that's what Nikan's all about. Like reflecting. What have I done? What have they given me? What have I given back? Yeah? What's the reality? Dharma's about reality. Yeah? Which is also about love. And if we can love beyond defeat, that's a sacred realm. That's a pure land. And I think therapists, that's what therapists are trying to do. They're trying to get the person beyond defeat. Yeah? Beyond defeat. So as a methodology, in Buddhism, in the Abhidhamma, it gives you a whole, in the 7th book of the Pali version of the Abhidhamma, you get a whole categorization of methods, of ways in which the mind is conditioned. Yeah? Mind is conditioned in all sorts of ways. Each state of mind that you have is conditioned by, for instance, what state of mind you had in the minute before. Yeah? The mind does have a sequencing, a flowing, So as a therapist, you need to know that. You pay careful attention to the person, and you notice what leads to what leads to what leads to what. Rogers' method was very good in that respect. Follow the client with great intensity. Yeah? See what they say next. How does it relate, one thing to the next, like that? in passing, I can say that means that the idea of being in the present moment carried to a limit, carried to an extreme, is a mistake. Because the whole meaning of life is about sequencing. It's not about the present moment. If you take the present moment in isolation, life becomes meaningless. The person who lives in the present moment just is a person with advanced senile dementia. You see? The meaning of life is to do with the flow of time. In Buddhism, to me, there'll be other people with their interpretations of Buddhism who would argue with me, but to me, the fundamental dimension of reality in Buddhism is time. It's the flow of time. When we talk about dependent origination, one thing leads to another. So this is one way in which the mind is conditioned. And a lot of Buddhism is about that flow, that sequencing, that one thing leads to another. My father was as he was because of what had happened. And because of what he saw in the future too. And the same's true for all of us. If you can't understand the client's past and future, you can't understand the client. Then if you only see their presentation, you don't understand anything, really, not much. It's a distraction. You can distract them from their life by concentrating on the present moment. And sometimes that works, and sometimes that's a sort of, what can you say, first aid therapy. If you get somebody to be mindful of the present moment, they forget about their troubles for that moment, and they feel better. But all you've done is distract them, actually. The troubles are still there. The tiger's still waiting at the door, ready to eat them, And maybe they actually do need to do something about that tiger, not just pretend it's not there. So that's one way the mind's conditioned. But another way that the mind is conditioned is that the mind is always conditioned by its object. The mind is conditioned by its object. This is a straight quote from the Abhidhamma. It's also fundamental of the philosophy of phenomenology, which is a big part of Western 19th century, 20th century philosophy. Mind is conditioned by its object. So my father had these objects and those objects, and also his own father and his own mother, and and I have him. Like, what I am is a function of my objects, and of my objects' objects. So methodologically, what an other-centered approach is about in therapy is that as the therapist, you need to pay attention not just to your client, not just to your client's state, not just to your client's inner state even, but also to their objects. So when the client says, as in the workshop I talked about a case and I said the woman sat down and she said, I have 2 sons. Tell me about your sons. I need to pay attention to her objects. If at that moment her life is centered on her sons, tell me about your sons. Don't tell me about your state at this moment, because that's asking her to forget about what she's come here to tell me about, which might make her feel better temporarily, but it actually takes her away from what matters. So the others are very important. And I suppose that's the one really sort of, to me, really important methodological point that runs through Naikan, runs through, ecological work probably too, everything. Like the others are highly significant. That's what makes their life. That's what their love is all about. People don't do anything for themselves, actually. Really? Fundamentally, people don't do anything for themselves. I used to work in a hospital where I interviewed all the people who've made suicide attempts. The people who actually commit suicide are the people who have nothing to live for but themselves. What keeps a person alive is their connections with other people. If they're engaged with somebody else, if they felt that it mattered to somebody else, whether they were alive or not, then actually, even if they made an attempt, generally speaking, they would not kill themselves. If they felt that at some deep level, it doesn't really matter to anybody whether I'm here or not. That's your really at-risk case. Yeah? But that's the person who can just live for themselves, you know, the high spot of Western philosophy. Yeah? Get to a point where you can just live for yourself. You know, when you can just live for yourself, what are you going to do? Die. Yeah? I mean, it's quite interesting that Freud developed this notion of the ego. Yeah, early in his career, he felt that the general case of psychotherapy was, I want to do something and something stops me, something prevents me. Yeah? So he talked about the ego that wants to do something and the it that stops it, which in German is das Es, yes, which then got translated as the id, you know, which is Latinized. Yeah. It stops me. So he had this sort of idea of like, and then out of that he then developed the notion of like two basic drives, which were like the ego drive and the libido, the life force. Yeah? And then at the third stage of his thinking, he decided that the ego drive was what we now call thanatos. Yeah? It was the drive that led to death. Yeah? Very interesting. Freud, actually, you read Freud deeply, it's very Buddhist. Yeah? It's all about how our blind passions run our lives, and our ego struggles in the midst of it and leads us to our death. Yeah? Anyway, this is getting me off my track. One of my 10 tracks. Oh yes, I know. I meant to start. He just said, whoa, where are we? I meant to start with a quote from Honan, but I forgot about it. Honan says, let me read it from the book, because that's just a bit of it. Honan says, you know, Honan had this, several of the great sages of Pureland Buddhism, Han Luan, Chan Dao, and so on. They made this distinction between what they called the Holy Gate and the Pure Land Gate. You know this. Probably most of you, some of you know this. Not everybody here is familiar with Pure Land Buddhism, perhaps. But there was the idea, was established, probably by Tan Luan, but going right back to Nagarjuna, that there was, in a sense, an easy way and a difficult way in Buddhism. The difficult way was to follow in the Buddha's footsteps, do all the things that a Buddha does, and become a Buddha yourself. That's hard work. Yeah, it's called self-power. Yeah, and it's the way of achieving Buddhahood. Yeah, that's one path. The other path, the easy way, is to have faith in a Buddha. The basis is just like I said this in the workshop, but I'll say it again for the people who weren't there. Like, if you were there at the time of Shakyamuni, you might see what he did, and you might think, oh, that's fantastic. I want to be like that. I'll follow in his footsteps. I'll do all the things, to become a great bodhisattva, to become a Buddha, and so on. That's what I did try to do in the early days of my involvement in Buddhism. Sat hundreds of hours of meditation, tried to follow all the various codes, did this, that, and the other. Honan is notable for having been somebody who was generally regarded as the most saintly person in the country, the most learned person in the country, who'd done vast amounts of practice, who was extremely adept in following all the instructions, but who in himself felt, I never achieved anything by all this. You see? And he then read Shandao, and he wrote many things about these two different ways. And he says, it should be known that the practice of the Holy Gate endeavors, by which he means the self-power way, endeavors to extricate one from the delusive worlds through the pursuit of wisdom, right? That's probably how most people in the West think of Buddhism, right? Because most people are following what he calls the Holy Gate, yeah? It endeavors, it's difficult this, because I can't hold this and have my glasses on and read the book at the same time. But anyway, that's my handicap. The practice of the Holy Gate endeavors to extricate one from the delusive worlds through the pursuit of wisdom. Yeah, I think it's worth noting, because I think that not just how most people understand Buddhism in the West, it's also how a lot of people understand psychotherapy. Yeah? If you just get enough insight, enough knowledge, if you know what's wrong with you well enough, you'll be cured. You'll be freed. Yeah? I had an alcoholic client once who said, I have to drink because I'm an alcoholic. It doesn't always follow that. Knowing your diagnosis or even knowing the DSM backwards will liberate you. Yeah? It won't. Knowing about your condition doesn't necessarily change it. This is a really important fundamental. Anyway, that is one approach to Buddhism. And then he says, it should be known that the practice of the Holy Gate endeavors to extricate one from delusive worlds through the pursuit of wisdom, and that the Pureland Gate teaches one to return to a state of foolishness, guchi in Japanese, yeah, in order to be born in the utmost bliss land. Like, returning to a state of foolishness is very crucial. But you see, I think, in a sense, what returning to a state of foolishness here means is acknowledging defeat. It's acknowledging that I can't. Yeah? It's acknowledging that I sat all those hours of meditation, I didn't get enlightened. I had some amazing experiences, yeah? But I did not finish up with no passions, no suffering, no da-da-da-da. Actually, I probably became more passionate. Yeah? Probably did. Yeah, I had a nice conversation, lovely conversation, I remember, with some Theravada monks, and they said to me, you've done lots of meditation, what did you get from meditation? And I said, well, I think I became more sensual, I said. It wasn't the answer they wanted. But, it's true. You sit, and you have this, like, when you sit, your threshold of awareness drops, so that you can hear a pin drop. Like, you become sensual. You become aware of the finest gradations of being in this world, and that can be wonderful, yeah, because you start to appreciate so many things that before you didn't even hear. You didn't even notice them, yeah. But it doesn't necessarily take you out of this world. It takes you into this world, yeah. So perhaps seeing my father's pain, maybe. After that and before that, how's it going to be? Actually, I'm going to have more sensitivity to his pain after than before. Yeah? I mean, actually, it's going to be more painful for me after than before, in one sense. Yeah? It's actually easier to live a life when you're immune in some way. Yeah? And that's why a lot of the psychopathology that we're up against, why are people drug addicts? Why are people television addicts? Why do people shut down their lives? Because there's so much pain. Yeah? If you open yourself up, you open your heart, you run into what my Zen master called great grief. That's where it goes. It means that I sit here and I actually feel my father's awful grief. Yeah? And what's more, I have to face the fact that I can't help him as his son. Maybe a therapist could help him, but as his son, there wasn't anything I could do. You can't solve all problems. Yeah? There isn't a way, as far as I know. I have not come across, in all my studies of Buddhism, Western philosophy, Western psychology, everything else, I have not found a way to solve all problems. Yeah? And very often you are in situations which are excruciatingly painful because you're aware of the suffering of the other and you can do naught about it. This is one of the worst frustrations of loving. Yeah? Like that. You can see. I could see what the problem with my father was. I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't bring those people back. Yeah? I couldn't, you know. What would his friends do? They'd say, oh, Ken, forget about it. Come and have a beer. Well, that was probably a loving act, you know. And again, you know, I'm sitting there thinking, well, I don't approve of alcohol. Which is the real love, you know? Which is the real love? To not approve of alcohol because you see all the harm it does in the world and eschew it yourself and so on? Or to say, come on, Ken, have a beer. I don't know. I don't know which is the real love. I mean, they're both love. They're two different sorts of love. Yeah? But each of them is going to get you into trouble. Yeah? The abstemious love is going to make a gulf between me and my Father that's going to be extremely difficult to cross. The other one has all sorts of pitfalls that we can readily, you know, after we've downed a few bottles, I don't need to describe the problems we could get into. You see? But they're both acts of love. You see? Let me tell you a bit more about Buddhism. I got some more Buddhism here. Well, this is Buddhism. Here we are. This is Buddhism. This is the Buddhist answer. But since you've come all this way, we'll confuse you with some other stuff. What harms? Dharma harms. We've already done that. Harms, heals. I don't know. Anyway. Oh, here's a good bit of classic Buddhism. Yeah? Classic Buddhism. This is real Buddhism, this is. This is Sanskrit. That's real Buddhism. You'll all have heard this bandied around. It's often translated as all things are impermanent, all things are suffering, all things are not self. Yeah? And in that sense, it's a sort of key bit of Buddhist teaching that most people know. And it's also quite central to the concern of this conference in terms of all things are not self. Yeah? I mean, what's other-centered approach about? It's about getting away from self. You know, the methodology. As a therapist, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to help my client to explore their world, which is their others, without getting sucked into the downward spiral of narcissism. So classically, a Western-trained therapist, whatever their school, the therapy, what tends to happen in the therapy is, let's bring the client back. Client comes in and says, I'm having a problem at work, or I'm having a problem with my wife, or I'm having a problem with my husband, or I'm having a problem with my brother, sister, you name it, whatever, yeah? Fairly soon, therapist is going to say, how is this for you? What they're in effect saying is, I don't want to hear about those other people, I want to hear about you. You see? Now, in one sense, this is an act of love, yeah? To love is to esteem. Yeah? That's what I said I was going to talk about, isn't it? Esteem. To love is to esteem. What does to esteem mean? It means to make that other a supreme value. The phrase center of the universe has been bandied about a fair bit in this conference. When you love, that person becomes the center of the universe. That's esteem. While they're the person in focus. Doesn't mean that you don't love other people as well, but those other people, when they come into focus, become the center of the universe. Yeah, you might love your spouse and also your children. Yeah, and of course, sometimes having two centers of the universe can create problems. Yeah, but that's life. Yeah, but the thing about love is that love essentially is an act of perception. Rogers would agree with this, in which we esteem. We have unconditional positive regard for this other. So when the therapist says, tell me about how it is for you, They're giving, it's an act of love. It's an act of esteeming the client. And a lot of Western therapy is based on that. But really, the deep meaning of this person's life is not themselves. It's the esteem they have for other people. You see? And so actually, methodologically, it's closer to the truth and the meaning of this person's life for me to get them to talk about those other people and for us to explore those other people and that world than it is for me to take them away from those people and back into their own world. They should pick up the fact that I have unconditional positive regard for them by my manner, not by my getting them to talk about themselves. Because actually, if I get them to talk about themselves more and more, I'm taking them closer to suicide. You see? I'm actually taking them away from the things that make their life real, meaningful, and important. Okay? I'll come back to it. Let's talk about Buddhism. All things are impermanent, all things are suffering, all things are not self. But you may have noticed that in the Sanskrit, the things are not the same in this sentence. Yeah? The way that this is usually presented, it's like there's three things that are the same. Yeah? They're just, all things are impermanent, suffering, and not self. No, that's not what it says. In the actual Sanskrit, there's a contrast between the first half, or the first two-thirds, and the second. And I think this is intentional. Yeah, that's what the meaning of it is. What the Buddha was saying, the Buddha's not saying there's three characteristics of existence. The Buddha was saying there's two characteristics of samskara, but Dharma is something else. Yeah? That's what he's saying. Now, what are samskaras? Samskaras are what Thich Nhat Hanh calls mental formations. Sometimes internal formations. Like the things that go on in our own mind, our own feelings, our own thoughts. Yeah? So, tell me about yourself. What do you feel about this? Is tell me about your samskaras. Yeah? And that's, you can understand the naturalness of that in therapy in a way, because they're the dukkha, they're the suffering, and they're the impermanence. Yeah? What's the person suffering from? They're suffering from what's going on in them. Yeah? They're suffering from their internal world. Yeah? What heals is Dhamma. Yeah? What's Dhamma? Dhamma's anatma. What's anatma? Anatma is, atma means self. Yeah? Non-self. And of course we get into all sorts of metaphysical riddles and we say, tell me about your non-self. Well, what does it mean? Yes? What's the non-self? Yeah? If I'm here, what's non-self? This is non-self. Yeah? What's not self is other. Yeah? What's not self is the rest of the world. Yeah? That's what heals. That's what's Dharma. Yeah? So, the Buddha is here, I think, setting out a therapeutic methodology. Yeah? Which is the methodology of otherness. Yeah? Don't think non-self is some sort of metaphysical kind of super-self. Non-self is just what it says. What's not self is other. Yeah? What's not me is you. Them, him, her, it. Yeah? What I run into. Reality. Yeah? Reality. Relate to reality. And what is reality? Reality is the place where my love gets hurt. Yeah? Again and again and again. And can I go on loving? Yeah? Can I go on loving when my love gets hurt? Again and again and again. Yeah? What else happened in my family? You know, my parents got together at the end of the war. I told you, broke off the story, didn't I? We got these lovely photos of them, glamorous couple, him in his uniform. Yeah? And she was in the RAF too. She was in radar, which in those days was cutting edge of technology. Yeah, she was like like computers nowadays, you know. And probably in many ways the war was won by the side that it was won by substantially because of radar. Many of the battles were fought in the air, and it was because the Western Allies had better equipment for spotting where German aircraft were than the Germans had for spotting where Allied aircraft were, that the battles went the way they did. You know, Britain would have been successfully invaded if there had not been radar. So my mother was in like the forefront of all that. They were a very glamorous couple, yeah? So they meet, they fall in love. It's wonderful, yeah? Like Prince Charles and Diana, you know, and we know where that ended. Yeah, and life's like that, you know, wonderful, wonderful. And I still have some love letters between my parents, you know, when my mother died. There's a little box with a ribbon, and it was like from years and years and years and years ago, this was a time when he still loved me, sort of thing, you know, and I still loved him. And I wept buckets when I read these letters, you know. It was very moving, very moving. So like and there again you can see, like, you know, what was a great stay of her life, a strength of her life was something which was not of the here and now. It was, I was once loved by this man. You know. But what went wrong with their love? You know? Well, what went wrong with their love was other loves. Yeah? My mother loved her mother. You know? But her mother loved her father, her mother's husband. Yes? And when her mother's husband died, eventually, you know, as a long after effect of having been gassed in the First World War, you know, I remember my grandfather always gasping for breath. And you know, he'd been gassed. He'd been in the trenches in the First World War, and he'd been affected by gas. And you think, oh, how terrible. But then you think, well, that probably saved his life, because then he was invalided out. Yeah, everybody who stayed was killed. Yeah, but he was invalided out. So he spent the rest of his life struggling for breath. Yeah, but at least he was alive. And my grandmother, you know, was devoted to him, and they lived in this little house. Because, you know, in those days women didn't work, and if you've got an invalid husband, you ain't got much money. Yeah? So they lived in poverty, but, you know, they loved each other. And you might say, well, that's wonderful. Everything's going to go well. Happy ending. You can see the happy ending in sight. No. Yeah? Because when granddad dies, what does grandmother feel? You see? Grandmother came and stayed with us for a week. You know, the prospect was, come and live with us, Mum. Yeah? Come and live with us, Gran. So she came. She came and stayed with us for a week. And then she said, I've got a few things to do back in Northampton, where they'd lived. So my father drove her back to Northampton, and she went back to their old house, and she put her head in the gas oven and killed herself. She couldn't bear to live on her own, you know, without her man. Yeah. So that was great love. But it devastated my mother. Yeah. My mother felt deeply unworthy. She felt guilty. Yeah. She felt guilty because we'd lived abroad. So like for 6 years out of the previous 10, my mother had not been there for her mother. Yeah? And why had she lived abroad? Because she loved her husband and she loved her son and da-da-da-da-da. Yeah? But it meant that she felt she'd neglected her own mother. Yeah? So when the grandmother committed suicide, my grandmother, her mother, committed suicide, my mother went into deep decline. Whole of my adolescent years, it was like living under a black cloud. The house was gloom. Yeah. Well, my father, no doubt, was very supportive for a while, but then, there were nice, attentive secretaries at work and, other women around who would support him. He was starting to feel very alone on his own, because he was getting nothing from my mother. And I don't know, but I suspect that he probably had affairs and whatever. But anyway, the marriage started to fall apart. And in those days, you didn't separate. So, from when I was 10 onwards, my parents really were not a functioning marriage. Yeah. And that's all because of love. You see? So life is love and it's disappointment. That's why I wrote the book. You see? And that love is the esteem that we hold others in, and the pain it causes us. And Dharma is, can you love again after those defeats? Can you love again after those defeats? And therapy is, can you help somebody to love again after such defeats? And I think you can only do that by engaging with the person in their love, in their engagement with others, in their engagement with others and all the pain it brings. Yes, in the complexity and the non-simplicity of all that. You see? And the actual method by which you do it, well, there could be 100 methods. You could use your 2 chairs like we did earlier, We could use drama, we could use art, we could get you to draw pictures, we can, there are innumerable techniques that you can use. Yeah? But whatever technique I'm using, I'm trying to come from this sort of perspective, yeah? Which to me is what Dharma's all about. It may not be what Dharma's all about to you. You talk to 10 Buddhists, you get 10 different religions. It's same as with any religion. Talk to 10 Christians and ask them who God is. You'll get 10 different answers. But so I do think that although I'm committing the sin of yesterday and giving you a monologue, each of you will think deeply for yourself. It's not that I just want you to sort of gobble up what I'm saying. I'm just trying to share some of what I've been through, getting to the point I'm at with it, and by next year I'll probably be somewhere else. But if exposing that process to you enables you to nudge your own process forward a little bit further, and then we all talk to each other, I have great trust that this ball will roll. And creative things will happen. Yeah, creative things will happen because I trust that love, and I trust that even though, like last night, we had this feedback session, and somebody came up to me afterwards and said, "Did I hurt your feelings?" Well, a little bit, but that's the stuff of life. Where are we going to get? If we never hurt each other's feelings, we're all dead. Yeah. How are we doing for time? It's 10. It is break time. It was break time 5 minutes ago. Have 5 more minutes. Anyone want to say anything? Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.